Welcome to The Independent Musician. Our weekly podcast will focus on the independent artist and the music market at large. You'll hear from those artists as well as music execs, tech experts, and marketing leaders from around the globe. We'll discuss what it takes to make it in the biz and how you can overcome obstacles as you progress your craft, all the while making it interesting and fun. Now, here's your host, Mark Skoda.
This is Mark Skoda with The Independent Musician. I'd like to welcome our guest, Charleene Closshey, which indeed is an Irish name, is it not?
It is very Irish, and hence the red hair probably too.
That's right. Well, welcome to the show. I appreciate it, Charleene. And I actually knew a Closshey. I was married to a friend of mine, Steve Bannon. I think it was not S-H, but it was S-E, I believe. And I spent a lot of time in Ireland in my past life.
It's a great place to be, and we the Closshey clan tends to kind of be centralized down in County Clare in the Limerick area.
Indeed.
So.
Indeed, I had a lot of fun there. There's a little island off of the town of Limerick where they make the handmade sweaters. You may be familiar with it.
Yes, yeah, of course.
Right? I forget the name of the island, but I'll tell you a quick story, which was kind of funny. So we're going along, and we go into this little store in Limerick, and they've got those typical Southern Ireland sweaters for sale, and a woman with her one eye relatively closed, and her name's Mary, of course. And we said, "Mary, have you made these sweaters?" She says, "With my own two hands I made them." And then as we were looking at them, she said, "Now would you have a bit of the Baileys?" And she breaks out Bailey's Irish Cream, and there we are, all having a Bailey's buying sweater. So it was good fun.
Well, I don't think there's any other way to make a purchase of a sweater in Ireland. So
I believe you're correct.
Good old Mary.
So let's talk a little bit about you and your background. And I prior to the show, you talked about getting to Florida from climbs otherwise. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I've been in music since literally my entire life. I was born into it. Not that my family are musicians, but when my mother was pregnant, the doctor said, "You need to slow down." And she's like, "All right." So she took piano lessons. And whenever I came out of the womb, as soon as I could crawl, I crawled to the piano, pulled myself up, and started tapping on the keys. So my parents knew instantaneously they needed to connect me with music, and they did. And so I read music before I could read words. I started reading music when I was about 2. My first instrument was piano. And then about 10 years later, I was about 12, I picked up the violin, and that became my primary instrument for many years, many decades actually, and played professionally all around the world, did orchestral, did solo type of work, but then really also kind of dove into different kinds of expressions and styles because that was really important to me. Understanding something to the nth degree is how I move. So I really like understanding why things work, how things work, and how I can, whatever it is that I'm doing, how I can do that better.
Right.
So music's it's just always been here, and I've played multiple instruments, got into composing, ultimately, I don't want to say switched, but really transitioned more into using the voice. And that's where I am today. So I've been on Broadway, I've done everything from musical theater types of stuff. I've sung opera in Rome. I've Celtic fiddled with the sister show to Riverdance. I actually fiddled with Charlie Daniels multiple times. Bless him. And so, yeah, it's music it's just what you do. I think when you're a musician or an artist, there's just something about music being in your makeup. And it's interesting because you think about it, we're made of vibrations. We all are. No matter if we're an accountant or an engineer or an attorney or whatever, we're literally vibrating all the time. And I think musicians really take that to the next level because not only are we vibrating, we're receiving vibrations and then figuring out how to reinterpret those patterns and give them back.
Well, I think I tend to agree with you. I think that's why people love the analog version of music so much today, right? because of the waveforms that
Yes.
physically touch our eardrums and impact us both emotionally and indeed physically. That's why you see people rocking it out. That's why people see, movies responding to great scores and great music generally. So I think more than even digital recordings, which, I grew up on vinyl. So I clearly, in fact, have every record I've ever bought. And my son, who is now 17, is playing them, and he tells me, "Dad, I just heard this. This is so cool." And he's a drummer, so like you, he came out of the womb drumming. So in his case, and it's a bit different because instead of tapping keys, he's beating on everything around you. But it's good fun, and he's doing.
Might have been more challenging for your wife on that one this first 9 months.
That's right, exactly right. But music, so you obviously have made a living at music, and that is rarefied air by many young artists starting out today because it has changed so markedly. And, as your commitment to music has evolved and as you've gone from instrumentation to vocals to the many variant genres that you're playing, how did you sort of find this success besides obviously your innate talent?
Well, I think there's two things that immediately come to mind for that. And the first one is I think you have to be so grounded in what you do that you're never precious with your current level because you can always be better, always. I don't care who you are. And I've had the pleasure, privilege, and honor to work with some of the greats in every genre around the world. And that's huge common denominator. Who was it? It was one of the big band leaders. It might have been Glenn Miller. So he was doing an interview, and somebody asked him, "Well, how does it feel? You're surrounded by all these incredible musicians." And he said, "Listen, my goal is to always be the least talented person in the room. Then I know I'm doing something right." And so I think by getting out of one's own way of needing to be something for someone, that's baloney, just put it aside. It's all ego. And that's fine. We're human, we're ego, we have to deal with it.
Right.
But that actually really, really limits. And I find the people that can say, well, let's try this. How can I explore this? How can I do something a little different? How can I be better with this? How can my technique improve? How can I learn something new? Oh, wow, this person, you just kind of go down this rabbit hole of personal expansion. So I think always moving forward is really opening for a lot of experiences. And that coincides with a second point that immediately came to mind is so I'm an actor as well, and I've done film and whatever. And at acting improv, one of the things that's always discussed is never say no.
Right.
Conversely,
That's
always
right.
say yes. And I think that there's an element, especially as a young artist, and young doesn't necessarily have to refer to age, I think as a function of how green one is or not, but of understanding not only the industry and the people around them, because really true art is about the interconnection of understanding yourself within that flow. So is being able to give yourself permission to say, yeah, let's give that a shot. Let's try it. Let's see what happens. And that could be something as innocuous as in your own, practice room when you're wailing away on some scales and how can I do that differently, and giving yourself permission to say yes, to try something different. Or you're given an opportunity that sounds kind of, I never really thought I would pursue that path, but let's do it. Here's a great example. So when I had just graduated college and I was taking a year off, before I was actually headed back to get a JD MBA. I wasn't even going the conservatory route. So I thought, well, I'd done my undergrad in 3 years. Let's just give myself a year off. Started performing. It's all downhill from there. But but during that time, a dear friend of mine who happened to be the vice president of entertainment at Busch Gardens, huge entertainment park in Florida, she called me up. She's like, hey, okay, so I know this is not normally what you do, and she offered me a part-time gig where I would go into Busch Gardens twice a week.
Right.
And would get to play with this particular show. So it was no big, massive obligation, to something totally different, not something I was pursuing or ever looked for, but it came to me. And ultimately, that experience opened so many doors, including playing multiple times with Charlie Daniels, where he would actually ask me back to play acoustic sets with him, where he would play guitar and I would play violin/fiddle, depending on what we were playing.
Right, that's right.
And, so you just never know. Now, I do think there is something to be said for that deep conviction, that deep, your gut feel. If something just doesn't feel right, honor that. But everything else, just be aware of am I hesitant to say yes because my gut's telling me it's not a good choice, or because my ego is creating fear and I'm hesitant to walk boldly forward? So those are the two things that I think anytime I can really touch into that permission, I always find that doors, they don't even just fling open, they just kind of like blast open, and I get to walk forward. And some of the doors I'm like, yeah, let's keep going. Other doors I'm like, cool, been there, done that.
Right.
What's next? So,
I think what's interesting about that comment is your whole sort of discussion of what I call saying yes. Just say yes.
Yeah.
So many people forget that, and the second part of that is being human and being humble.
Yes.
Because a lot of people want to play a game, right? And so. In my own son's case, as I tell him all the time, I said, you're a drummer. I said, you've got to be the most humble guy on that stage, because at the end of the day, you'll get gigs and you'll get opportunities presented to you because you're helpful, you're humble, and you're always there. I said, it's better to be an hour early than a minute late, and always say yes, unless, as you said, there's something conflicting with your values or conflicting with whether it's legal or not. I've always suggested I want to write a book on just say yes, because my whole life in my corporate career was about saying yes, living overseas for over 13 years, living in 6 different countries, working in many, many more. And you get those opportunities, as you said, doors fling open when you're available and you make yourself evident to other people. So I think that's a good advice. And even in today's market, with young people starting out, the business of music is so difficult. But if you look at it first as an art form and as a expression of who you are, and then look at it as a business subsequent, I think you have the opportunity to move ahead and make it a living.
And I think it's interesting too, because I think there is, depending on especially, I think this is very genre specific. So I think each genre kind of presents artists with its own genre, its own unique set of challenges. So for instance, in the classical world, you're never the best. There's always something that you can do better, partially because you have teachers, coaches, guides, instructors telling you that constantly. So there's not a building up of confidence a lot of times. In fact, it can often be a very deconstructive world. And you see that in interactions. And I'm saying, across the board. That's not true for everyone. Because all the great artists, no matter what genre you're in, they rise above any of the adversity. So I think you have a perspective in the classical world of, okay, I have to constantly be better, I have to constantly move in that direction. But then there can sometimes be a gap of, but what is this art actually doing for my soul, for my humanity? Because if I can't show up with my own connection, my own healing in that, because isn't that what music does? That's
right.
That's what musicians do. We create music that in many ways is intended to elicit some sort of response. So, you've got this very kind of one approach, but then you've got, more in a rock or a pop world where it's all about the business, it's all about the connections, it's a very different kind of approach. So I think it's even interesting too of where each musician is, literally where, in genre-wise, of how their path, how different steps in front of them tend to unfold, and just witnessing that either firsthand or through very close secondary observation. So it's really kind of fascinating being able to put this all together. And I think for me, what that really hits home is that there's no one right way to do success. Because you don't do success, you just embody success, you allow success. Like you said, you say yes.
I think as well, looking at genre specific, I mean, the rock industry has changed, right? Because it was ascendant in the 60s and 70s and even through the 80s, and today now has been overtaken by hip hop and rap. So, as I tell people, it takes a lot more effort and creativity to write a song, write a melody, perform the multiple instruments, put that all together, produce it, edit, mix, and master it, and then get it out into the market. And to do that not once, but 11 times or 12 times for an album. Contrast that with a piece of rap music where you buy a beat for $25 online, you put your lyrics to it, you do that in the garage with a copy of GarageBand, and you push out new rap songs every 5.5 minutes. Now, that's not to degrade the genre, but it is to suggest
They're
that
just different art forms.
Precisely right. And as you pointed out in your earlier comment, there's always going to be a greater artist than you out there. There's always going to be somebody with greater talent that you're always trying to sort of aspire to. And I think that all musicians need to have that sense, particularly of the younger musicians coming into the markets today, and particularly as we've seen things like streaming occur. The technology's changed rapidly. But we're also seeing some more opportunities because live music is beginning to be more appreciated, particularly post-lockdown, as we're seeing people just want to associate with that sort of crowd and experience a show, which arguably is far better than a live stream or you and I talking via camera, right? And just having that performance, even as you say, with a fiddle and Charlie Daniels, is going to be a much more interesting thing than watching that or listening to it in an audio form.
Well, it's interesting because the science behind that actually 100% validates what you're saying. So that there's a scientific response within our physical body that off the chart difference when we're experiencing music live versus when we're experiencing exact same music. It can even be music that has been created digitally, so it's not even a replication of an acoustic combination of instruments. So whether that's played with where someone's just listening to it or watching it, but it's whenever you step into that space, there is a true magic that happens. I think there's a synergy of vibration. And I'm actually referencing a study that a dear friend of ours, so we're working with a group of scientists out of the United Kingdom, and they're studying the impact of vibration on the physical body. So that particular study I'm talking about, they were noting that red blood cells will actually come back to life whenever they are exposed to specific frequencies. So they wanted to test what these frequencies are. So they were testing to see what effects red blood cells would have when they're exposed to different frequencies. And they had specific hertz frequencies that they're looking to measure. And they thought, well, while we're doing it, let's see what would happen if the blood that they're testing was exposed to music that was pre-recorded,
right,
or that was recorded or that was performed live in the lab with the blood samples. And the difference was so dramatic they actually couldn't measure. It was literally off of their charts from anything that they had anticipated. And that's the result of live music, how that hits your body in a powerful and visceral way. And I think you're right. People are craving that now. They need that experience.
Well, it's so tragic. Of course, I grew up in the rock era. I came from Cleveland, Ohio, which there was a live rock band on every corner. I played piano in my youth, and I was a frustrated pop star because all I learned was how to play the Gregg Concerto, and nobody asked you to sit down and do that in a bar.
Nobody cared about Chopin.
That's right, exactly. But having said that, I think what was interesting about that whole experience, of course, was people just enjoyed. There was a social element to that was important, right? Even to the point of the tactile response to an album opening, right? You'd cut that open and you'd see the lyrics and you'd feel the piece of vinyl and you'd smell it, exactly. And with digital, I like to call it the swipe right genres. We basically have eliminated that. But people are, by their very nature, are social. And so I think some of the things we're seeing today in live music, and why we're seeing such a competitive environment for live music, because so many people are trying to get out there, not only to make a living, but I think to showcase their talents, is critical.
And I think it's interesting, too, because I think we're starting to significantly see shifts in demand of what audiences actually, whether they can articulate it to themselves or not, what it is that they really want. What is that experience? And I think it's a very different experience than what it was 3 years ago. Life has shifted. Life has changed. We have a radio, a holiday radio song that's on Hot AC Radio every year. And so, you would go through all these planning, brainstorming sessions every year to try to figure out, anticipate the market, how do you get best placement, those types of things. I mean, radio is a whole other game.
Yep.
And it's interesting, the past 3 years of really the sentiments of where radio programmers expected people, their listening consumptions to be, and then actually what came back of what they were, and people really needing to feel this connection, this idea of feeling things that maybe they weren't as enamored with the new shiny, something different out here that distracted them for a minute. They actually were like, wait, I've had enough of these distractions out here. Can we bring it back? Let me bring it back to home for a hot second, just for a moment of peace, which is very apropos, especially for the holiday seasons. And that's even in stations that are streaming Lady Gaga and Taylor Swift and the Jonas Brothers. So I think the audiences are craving something a little different now, more so than ever.
And I think, but it is also interesting to me as we think about performance live music. I mean, the legacy acts that are still touring.
Yeah.
It's
guys, that comfort, familiarity.
Exactly, and also I think there's a sense that the younger generation that has come up through these various genres are no longer performing in that manner. And I think that as I look back to my own experience, right, of bands, I mean, I go back to the fact that I hired Eric Carmen and the Raspberries for my senior prom back, and he was an Ohio artist, and he became a big pop artist in the 70s. I joke, I said I paid a band $350 for the show for that prom, but they're still getting paid $350 today, these young bands coming up 50 years later. But the point of the story is, I think what's happening, in my humble opinion, is that the record labels today, in particular, are no longer grooming bands. So you don't have the evolution of a Kansas. You don't have the evolution of the Boston. You don't see the Eagles. You don't see people waiting, and there's no opportunity sort of to grow that. So what you have is the instantaneous success, quote unquote, of the American Idols or The Voice. And the problem is most of those people never, ever have staying power. Very few do, I should say. And I think that's partly because we haven't allowed people to hone their craft. You talk about the many years that you've worked, the way you move through your musical experience, both in terms of various instruments to now vocals to performance to acting. All of those things took time. And yes, you look like a 20-year-old, and that's okay. But the reality is that I think at the end of the day, you have to have that evolution and the time and space to do that. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges in today's world for emerging artists in particular.
I think there's so many, 100% agree. And I think there's so many things that compound everything that you're saying. I think that as a society, we are being coerced into thinking that fame should happen for everyone.
Right.
You are just as famous as this next person, which is fine, because I believe that the next person is just as important as I am, and I'm just as important as you, and you're just as important as Billy Joel. It doesn't matter, whatever the conversation. We're all on equal footing in that way. However, I think what's being skewed is this idea that there's something that people are, that we suddenly deserve something. So then it moves us away from this recognition or this connection to, hey, you know what? I enjoy doing something and I'd like to work. I'd actually like to polish my own diamond. I mean, a diamond doesn't just wake up one day and it's like, look how shiny and gorgeous I am. I mean, right. A diamond, how many millions of years of compression, of tension that actually then begins to create what we pull out of the earth to say, let me see if I can't polish that up. And whoa, look at that. There's something special there. And so I think we're being trained, or we're training our youth to think that you don't have to worry, you don't have to do the work. No, that's not. And unfortunately, we're seeing it's affecting not just the arts. I mean, it's affecting
everything.
A lot of conscious living.
Exactly. Well, that's a good segue into sort of what you've been doing, sort of the sounds of the universe, right? I think you've released this new album, Align. And really, it's the sort of discussion we had at the beginning of our conversation about the sense of just sound and sound's impact on the psyche. And so you've gone all the way through this whole playing a fiddle, playing some piano, singing a song on Broadway, and now you're giving us the universe, the sounds of the universe in this new album. Tell us a little bit about that, and because I found that most interesting about sort of this transition of your background and experience.
Right? Me too.
Very wild, very strange for a little girl from Ireland.
Right? How did that happen?
How did that happen?
Well, it's really interesting because, and I feel like maybe for the first time in my life, I can actually say this. And yes, eyebrows will get raised, but they definitely can't commit me anymore. So, I've always been able to hear things that others can't. And I know I'm not alone. This is not an abnormal thing by any stretch. But one of the things that I've often been able to do is I can close my eyes and I can hear music in different places. And all it is, when I say music, I just literally mean vibration.
Sound,
music
right.
is something that it's a term that we've coined to give credence to a beautiful vibration or some kind of something that fits within this idea that we can say, oh, this is a connection to vibration. Because I think otherwise, a lot of times we miss the fact that, well, like I said before, you're 30 trillion cells sitting there vibrating, constantly moving. You're actually, as matrixy as it sounds, quantum physics actually shows, well, you are not a solid object.
That's right.
We're moving from an understanding that matter is solid. It's not. Matter is actually a function of observation. How do you shape? How do you mold? How do you propel observation? Is through intention. And that in and of itself is a huge concept and topic that most people are like, I can't wrap my brain around that right now.
Right.
And it's fascinating because I think we've been trained, like we were just saying before, to not be able to do that. We're not allowed to critically think. The moments of silence, the moments of pause are being diminished increment by increment by increment. And every day, people, social media, like you said, the swipe right culture, there is no time in between to understand what had just happened so that you can be present with the next present moment.
Well, that's right, and particularly young people. I mean, they talk about snapping now, right? They use Snapchat. They don't even use, Facebook is old, and we see that. For old people, my son tells me all the time. But I think the reality, of course, is that the research has suggested that this swipe right culture is actually rewiring our brains, and so these kids have the ability to communicate and to have that moment of silence, to sit there and contemplate, is becoming impossible for the entire population. And that's a great regret, frankly, because at the end of the day, you must have that time to just sit still occasionally and do nothing.
It's interesting because I wonder. So I am the eternal optimist, and I can't help but think. So we have such incredible potential yet to be activated. I mean, we use 5 to 7% of our brain. So if we have such amazing potential to reactivate, to rewire, even if there was some nefarious plot to rewire the way that humankind move or think or use their capacity, I can't help but wonder if whatever powers that be, and we'll just leave it with that, if there's something much greater that actually allows us to take this new functioning, this new wiring, and shift into a point where there's a different level of understanding. Maybe this actually is the precursor to being able to shift into to using more of our gray matter. Maybe we need all of this mumbo jumbo so that whenever moments of silence are able to be interjected into these spaces, they become that much more profound. I don't know. It's an interesting conundrum, and yet I actually do have a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope.
Well, I think, I do a lot of research on transhumanism, right? And so for
Yeah.
me, there are the nefarious elements of trying to influence the way people think and behave, and sort of the integration of man machine. I mean, arguably, when we built the automobile, we became quasi-cyborgs. We're built in a shell that moves us through space and time,
Sure.
and basically is now becoming more and more integrated into our daily psyche. By the way, there's a great movie about brain usage, if you've ever seen it, Lucy.
Okay, yeah.
It's a fun movie, good sci-fi piece of fiction, however. But at the end of the day, I think, to your point, when we are still and when we can create those conditions of moments of silence, they can become more profound in a world that is so rapidly changing with minute by minute news, with the internet refreshing every single day. I mean, we can't even. I was joking the other day with my son. I said, I've got a new code that you'll not be able to read. He said, what's that? I said, it's cursive. And of course, they've never been taught that. These kids can't even read the Constitution any longer unless it's typed out, right? So we're seeing profound changes in the culture, profound changes in the way we behave. And at the same time, music, even with the advent of the computer, still relies heavily on a very differentiated element of sound via physical instruments. You cannot achieve that with a synthesizer or with a computer on a digital 1-0. The ability to take a bow across a violin and have that different vibration occur over time does not get translated through in a digital form that it does in an analog form.
I think it might get translated differently, because I used to 100% be very much in the same camp that you are when it came to being truly an acoustic purist of understanding the effect in my body, because I could feel it directly under me.
Right.
One of the things I learned with this album, with Aligned though, actually, and I was really taken back, and so I'm delighted to share, because there's actually certain frequencies that whenever they can engage with other frequencies, no matter their point of origin, acoustic, digital, doesn't matter, they actually begin to oscillate in a way that there is almost like a tertiary response. So you could kind of liken it to, in some ways, you could kind of liken it to the overtone series, where there's how many 13 notes that actually make up one pitch. If I struck a singing bowl or a piano note or guitar chord or whatever, or note, not a chord, that I have multiple pitches that are resonating, but I only perceive one. So there's actually there were these really interesting oscillations that came through in the composition of Aligned, and I think that's actually why I kept going down and down this rabbit hole. So the album Aligned initially came from literally just a thought, and I just started kind of putting some things together, and I told my husband, I'm like, this is going to be brilliant. I think I'm really onto something. And then I got halfway through and I was like, I don't know. I don't know. No. And so I just put a kibosh on it. And then about 4 months later, I was really getting into sound healing and really understanding the science of sound and listening to some of the different scientists that are using frequencies. So everything from frequencies that we can hear, that you can go on YouTube and this pitch cures cancer. Possibly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To like Rife machines that you can't hear something, but there's frequencies and they're beyond our pitch understanding. So it really kind of took me down this rabbit hole of understanding, well, how do we assimilate sound? How do we actually feel these vibrations? And so our scientist friend, he began measuring songs that we produce that are 100% acoustic as well as 100% digital. The healing frequencies and potentials based on the sound waves exist in both. And actually, some of the really low frequencies, they're what are called the ELFs, or the extremely low frequencies, they actually are more profound. They have more profound positive impacts and effects on the human body when they're produced digitally than with the acoustic counterpart. Same pitch, same volume, but there's something about the zeros and ones. And so I think this is just the tip of the iceberg as to understanding, well, what happens if we fuse both? How do we create these new worlds? Because, if we were smart enough, we're connected enough to create sound acoustically, thank you, Pythagoras, helping us understand kind of these breakdowns. But then also digitally, why we're both here? How do we use all of that to our benefit? And it really is really fascinating. So I think there's some really strong potential that we can begin to explore. My favorite quote of all times is Albert Einstein when he said, the future of medicine will be, the medicine of the future will be the medicine of frequencies. And that's what we're seeing. Music heals.
Right, it does.
And not just music, sound, vibration, it heals.
Indeed, and not screeching and scratching, but basically.
Well, that can be destructive.
Correct. Exactly right.
So, white noise. We think white noise. So white noise is basically the for anyone who's not familiar, but it's basically the happening of all sounds evenly across your very lowest to your very highest pitch. And so basically you have all the frequencies that are happening together all at the same pitch. And so white noise is something that's very similar to what we experience at a waterfall. Well, we know that experiencing a waterfall in real time is very relaxing to the body. We're actually seeing, oh, it's lowering your heart rate. Oh, it's lowering your pulse rate. Oh, it's actually beginning to create red blood cells. But when you turn the volume up, like you start walking close to this beautiful waterfall, and it just gets a little too much, you actually, they've measured, you're destroying red blood cells. So just like anything, I think it's a function of our physical instruments or our bodies, and every body is a little bit different.
Right.
Which makes sound healing unique and for me, I think that's why there's place for all kinds of musical expression, because music that might heal me may not heal someone else, but music that does not heal me absolutely could heal them. So.
Well, I think exactly. It's very interesting because I watch a lot of videos and do some research on this, and not certainly as deeply as you have, but there's some great videos out there which basically is just playing these frequencies for everything from getting you calmed down to reducing your blood pressure, even helping you go to sleep at night. And it's not necessarily just white noise. I mean, these are actually compositions of different frequencies and they are musical in that sense. So it is fascinating that we've discovered this only really relatively recently. We always knew that music and the analog of music in particular, that's why sitting in a concert hall with the proper acoustics would just have such an enormous emotional impact. Well, it wasn't just the sound of the music. It wasn't just the composition of a Mozart or a Chopin. It was the physiological response to the analog waves that you were hearing and feeling beyond the actual musical composition itself. That wasn't well understood. We talked about what a wonderful piece of music this was. Well, yes, there was a physiological response as well as an auditory and mental response to the actual composition. And those two were not well understood when these great composers were writing their music. We just felt that it was appealing to the human soul. We talked about the psyche, etc.
And I think too, there's a much deeper connection, especially whenever think about it. Music in the day was basically one of two things. Well, one of three things. It was sacred, what would be called secular, or what might be called high music, so classical type of music. So your Mozart's, those types of things. So secular being like your folk stuff, the Molly Malone kind of songs that everybody sings because there's a familiarity and a comfort to it. But when you take music, especially historically, beyond the point of lyric, it became incumbent upon composers to really tap into. They had to create a narration of sorts without the use of the word, which in many ways I think is what makes much of what we consider classical music, and I mean the highest pieces, why they have tended to live in perpetuity is because there is connection to a story that all of us can relate to somehow, very viscerally. And they're all connects to the archetypes. I mean, Jung talks about it with the 12 main archetypes that any society, no matter wherever you are, you can break down. We understand life through these 12 different faces, the hero, the lover, the magician, etc. But he also said something that I think is really cool. He says, but actually, we have a limitless number of archetypes in the universe because these stories can be told with slightly different colors, with different expectations, with different understandings, culture by culture by culture. So you have these really, I think a lot of times what made the classical music last was this connection to these archetypes that we knew. It's a resonance of the archetype that we knew within. So it's not even always about needing to use words. In fact, sometimes I think words can get in the way. You know, for me, I've never considered myself a songwriter. I'm a composer. Mm-hmm. And if I work on lyrics, great.
Right.
That's not my first place where I go. But for me, it's all about the construction of the story within the sound. And it makes sense if all of this were, your first places of creating music. It's kind of hard to make the violin actually say words. So,
well, I think there's a great documentary I watched. It's called Score, and it's really our modern composers who are writing music. In fact, arguably, the reason orchestras still exist beyond playing the classics is because of music for movies. I mean,
yes.
It would have receded into the time immemorial. But if you ever had a chance to watch it, do so. There's a couple of them like that. They talk about and just the magnificence of the sounds. I mean, and evolution of some of the musical scores that we talk about and we still love to this day. Everything from Star Wars and some of the other Jaws. Who can forget a simple dun 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 dun? I mean,
well, here's the thing. It's all about melody. It's always about melody, and I think it goes back to that Jungian idea that there's 12 archetypes. Yeah. Well, there's 12 notes on a keyboard. Right. So how many different ways are we actually going to arguably create new melodies?
Right.
The permutations actually aren't nearly as ridiculous as we like to think that they are. And, stories all the time of, you stole my, no, actually I didn't. It was original to me in that moment.
Yeah, there was only so many riffs on a guitar.
Exactly. And, so we just did our first for-year consideration, which is a nomination for a Grammy for the Aligned album. And I really got to listen to some really great music of some fellow composers. And so Aligned is in the New Age category, but New Age also very closely connects with classical as well. And I think one of the people that I really enjoyed connecting with the most, and we still chat because I just love him as a person, but also his work, is Christopher Ten. And I think that his latest composition, The Lost Birds, is phenomenal. And you want to talk about connecting into story, connecting into just this visceral response, and it's living outside of the film world. Now, he's also up for consideration for a soundtrack for a game, a video game that he made. Sure. So it's very cool. There's lots of ways to consume great music, but that's right. I'm really glad too that
that's by the way that's brought a lot of rock stars back online too with their music being played in games. Exactly. Listen, it goes back what we were talking about at the very beginning. It's a function of demand. Indeed. Where are people consuming, and how do we connect? How do we give them what it is that we feel is important enough to say, something that's inside of us? How do we give that back to them? We got to find them. It's not on them. It's on us as musicians. Right. Indeed. Tell me just as we got a closing minutes here, tell me about the Grammy experience. How do you go about moving towards getting quote unquote a Grammy as a composer? What are sort of the hoops you have to jump through, and what is the process you go through? Be interesting to hear.
It's interesting, and it's a little. I'm sure every genre has its own unique experiences and pathways because of just a function of their individual industries. But for us, I'll just give you a quick breakdown because at first I always thought, oh, this is so daunting, I could never do it. Oh my God. Actually, so it's quite accessible if you can kind of connect to the overall flow. So let's break down the overall flow. So who votes for the Grammys? Members of the Recording Academy. Mm-hmm. Okay, so how do you become a member of the Recording Academy? Well, you have two people who are members nominate you. And they say, oh, I think Charleene Closshey should become a member of the Recording Academy because whatever. And they fill out a little application, and the Recording Academy goes through and says, okay, let's invite this person to apply. So then I get X amount of time to create a application package, and I send it back to them and cross my fingers, and there we go. So in 2021, I was invited to become a member of the Recording Academy. And so I kind of wanted to watch and sort of see how this all broke down, because there's three, basically you can kind of think of there's two main rounds that happen with the voting for the actual Grammy Award. The first is where all of these pieces are submitted. So for instance, I don't know if I'm allowed to disclose how many, but let's say there are over 150 in the New Age category for this year. All of the voting members will come together and say, I like that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. We get to pick 5 from up to X amount of categories that we're allowed to vote in. I think we get to vote in, we have to pick 3 main categories, but then each category will have like subgenres under them.
Right,
so for instance, classical would have opera or classical compendium, or which is like symphonic works, or classical instrumental solo, etc. So you get to vote within certain number of entries and certain number of classifications. Okay, so that's round 1, basically, which is also called the for-your consideration. Well, those votes are tallied, and those top 5 from each category will move forward and become the official nominees. That's how you garner an official Grammy Award nomination. And from that, then all the members come back together, actually during the holidays. So the first round of voting was October 13th through the 23rd. Then November 15th, they announced the nominees, the top 5 of every category. And then December, I want to say 14th through, or 15th through January 4th, we all come back together during the holidays with a little bit of eggnog, or maybe some Baileys. It depends on where you're voting. And we vote for our favorite in each category. And if memory serves, we vote for 1 in that final round. And then from that, those votes are tallied, and that's how we wind up with the Grammy Award. Now, this is the first year that is the flow for how it's being constructed. In years past, they've had committees and those types of things. And,
right.
They still have committees that kind of ensure in that first, the FYC process, that, yeah, that actually is an American roots song, or maybe no, that would actually be a Americana performance or something.
So they already make sure that the application for the particular genre and or category is in fact reflective of that.
Correct. And, like any organization, I'm sure some people have problems with it. Some people are like, it's perfect. It is what it is, whatever it is.
That's right.
But that's essentially the breakdown. So there were it's a great opportunity to go through and actually connect with your fellow Recording Academy members, because that's really how you garner votes and support. Otherwise, they don't know who you are. And if you think about it, if you open a ballot and you've got like, how many of the, pop is like 100, there could have conceivably even been thousands. I'm not sure, because I didn't look at the pop category of number of entries. And how do you connect with people?
Right.
And it's all about connection.
So there's some inside baseball here going on anyhow, right? Clearly in terms of building relationships and sort of getting your
I think all of life is about relationships, and I think all of life is also about perspective. So if we understand how a game is to be played, we're a lot more successful whenever we walk into that arena, whatever game it is that we're playing. If I don't understand how to play soccer and I walk onto a soccer field, I'm gonna have no idea what's going on. Even worse, if I walk onto a cricket pitch, it's not happening. I still don't get it, and I think I kind of got it. So it's one of those
other than wearing white and rubbing, getting
which
dirty.
I do like. I do approve of that.
Right.
I really like the white and the cap. So, but yeah, that's kind of the breakdown for the Grammys, and many of the other awards as well. Aligned actually was nominated for a Hollywood Music and Media Award, and that gets announced on November 16th. So we're really excited about that. And it's just a kind of a function of, as you say, show up and say yes.
Indeed.
Would you think this is a good idea? I don't know. Let's try it. Let's try it. What's the worst that could happen?
And anybody can apply for a Grammy, and they have to go through that process. Am I right?
So only voting members can bring forth a album for consideration in the first for-year consideration round. So if you're already a voting member, it's very easy for you to pop your album in. If not, you can garner support by other voting members in your community. So if the Grammy path is something that's important to an artist, make friends with people on Facebook. I mean, I have to tell you, most of the people, I have not met a single person who was a jerko. They're actually very kind because, listen, we're all musicians. We all get it. We all get it. So
now I know who to have
my.
I might have my son send his first album to for you. Okay,
there you go.
Expecting to see it in email shortly.
There you go.
Charlene.
And so consideration.
Yes.
An album is open for consideration every year starting October 1st. So if the release happens October 1st through the following year, September 30th.
Yeah.
So we're already in now, which would be Grammy now 65, which would be the 2023 year.
Right.
So Aligned actually released on September 30th. So we were the last day in to be considered for Grammy 65 for this past year, for 2022.
Charlene, I think we're coming to the end of the show here. I appreciate your time. This has been a wonderful conversation. Where can people reach you? What's your social media? And more importantly and your music.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, I love to connect with people, and I spend most of my time, the easiest way, if you want to find any of them, just go to Charleene.com. And be careful, because there are many E's in my name. They just spontaneously appear. So Charleene is spelled Charleene. Charleene.com.
And that's how you got your own URL.
Exactly. Yes. My husband was smart to jump on that one when he did. And so come to the website. It'll direct you to all the social medias. I spend a lot of time on. I really don't spend a lot of time on social media, but when I am on social media, I love to be on Instagram. So reach out to me there. But wherever you are, say hi, and I'll find you. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook, of course, the Book of Face, and Instagram.
Great.
Have not really dove into TikTok yet because that's just. But there's only so many hours in a day, but I'll be excited. We're actually going to start doing some of the crystal singing bowls. I have a set of 13 chromatically tuned crystal singing bowls that are tuned to 432 hertz. And so we're going to start doing more lives on TikTok. But we do live streams right now on YouTube as well. So those are a lot of fun. And you can set your little reminders. Make sure you subscribe. And of course, thank you for liking and following, all that kind of good stuff. But
Indeed.
The crystal singing bowls are a lot of fun. We do a music meditation kind of hour sort of thing. So if you just need to chill, if you need to reset, if you need to get realigned, it's a great place to do it.
Terrific. Charleene Closshey, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And what a fascinating interview today. I appreciate it. We'll be in touch again. Thank you again. Have a great success. And good luck on the Grammy.
Thank you so much. And it was a pleasure to be here. And all my love to your listeners as well.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us this week on The Independent Musician. Make sure to visit our website, IronGateRecordsRadio.com, where you can subscribe to the show on your favorite streaming platform, so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this podcast, we'd appreciate you giving us feedback or simply tell a friend about the show. Be sure to tune in next week for a new episode of The Independent Musician, where the independent musician is the star.